各位弟兄姊妹，主內平安。
Brothers and sisters, peace be with you.
我哋歡迎係弟兄姊妹繼續參加布里斯托環基督教會嘅崇拜。
We once again welcome brothers and sisters, friends and family to join our Bristol Chinese Christian Church Sunday service.
讓我哋一同係讀一段經文。我首先會用廣東話去讀，跟住Kelvin 又係用英文去讀。
Let's start off first with a scripture reading, which will first be read in Cantonese by Pastor Martin, followed by English by myself.
撒母耳記上11章1到15節。亞捫人的王拿轄上來，對着基列亞比安營。亞比眾人對拿轄說：你與我們立約，我們就服侍你。亞捫人拿轄說：你們若由我刮出你們各人的右眼，以此凌辱以色列眾人，我就與你們立約。亞比的長老對他說：求你寬容我們7日，等我們打發人往以色列的全境去。若沒有人救我們，我們就出來歸順你。使者到了掃羅住的基比亞，將這話說給百姓聽，百姓就都放聲而哭。掃羅正從田間趕牛回來，問說：百姓為什麼哭呢？眾人將亞比人的話告訴他。掃羅聽見這話，就被神的靈大大感動，甚是發怒。他將一對牛切成塊子，託付使者傳送以色列的全境，說：凡不出來跟隨掃羅和撒母耳的，也必這樣切開他的牛。於是耶和華使百姓懼怕，他們就都出來，如同一人。掃羅在比色數點他們，以色列人有30萬，猶大人有3萬。眾人對那使者說：你們要回覆基列亞比人說，明日太陽近午的時候，你們必得解救。使者回去告訴亞比人，他們就歡喜了。於是亞比人對亞捫人說：明日我們出來歸順你們，你們可以隨意待我們。第二日，掃羅將百姓分為3隊，在晨更的時候入了亞捫人的營，擊殺他們，直到太陽近午。剩下的人都屠殺，沒有2人同在一處的。百姓對撒母耳說：那說掃羅豈能管理我們的是誰呢？可以將他交出來，我們好殺死他。掃羅說：今日耶和華在以色列中施行拯救，所以不可殺人。撒母耳對百姓說：我們要往吉甲去，在那裏立國。百姓就到了吉甲那裏，在耶和華面前立掃羅為王，又在耶和華面前獻平安祭。掃羅和以色列眾人大大歡喜。
1 Samuel chapter 11, verses 1 to 15. Reading from the NIV. Nahash the Ammonite went up and besieged Jabesh Gilead. And all the men of Jabesh said to him, make a treaty with us, and we will be subject to you. But Nahash the Ammonite replied, I will make a treaty with you only on the condition that I gouge out the right eye of every one of you, and so bring disgrace on all Israel. The elders of Jabesh said to him, give us 7 days, so that we can send messengers throughout Israel. If no one comes to rescue us, we will surrender to you. When the messengers came to Gibeah of Saul and said these terms to the people, they all wept aloud. Just then, Saul was returning from the fields, behind his oxen, and he said, what is wrong with everyone? Why are they weeping? Then they repeated to him what the men of Jabesh had said. When Saul heard their words, the Spirit of God came powerfully upon him, and he burned with anger. He took a pair of oxen, cut them into pieces, and sent the pieces by messengers throughout Israel, proclaiming, this is what will be done to the oxen of anyone who does not follow Saul and Samuel. Then the terror of the Lord fell on the people, and they came out together as one. When Saul mustered them at Bezek, the men of Israel numbered 300,000, and those of Judah 30,000. They told the messengers who had come, say to the men of Jabesh Gilead, by the time the sun is hot tomorrow, you will be rescued. When the messengers went and reported this to the men of Jabesh, they were elated. They said to the Ammonites, tomorrow we will surrender to you, and you can do to us whatever you like. The next day, Saul separated his men into 3 divisions. During the last watch of the night, they broke into the camp of the Ammonites and slaughtered them until the heat of the day. Those who survived were scattered, so that no 2 of them were left together. The people then said to Samuel, "Who was it that asked, 'Shall Saul reign over us?' Turn these men over to us so that we may put them to death." But Saul said, "No one will be put to death today, for this day the Lord has rescued Israel." Then Samuel said to the people, "Come, let us go to Gilgal and there renew the kingship." So all the people went to Gilgal and made Saul king in the presence of the Lord. There they sacrificed fellowship offerings before the Lord, and Saul and all the Israelites held a great celebration.
好，讓我哋係低頭同心禱告，
Let's all bow our heads in prayer.
讓我哋將今天嘅崇拜係恭敬擺喺你嘅手中，
Lord, we hand today's service into your hands.
我哋仰望喺你嘅面前。
We longingly look towards you today.
主啊，當我哋係分享你嘅話語嘅時候，
As we come and share your word,
求你都係與我哋同在，
may you be with us.
求你係祝福你嘅話語，
May you bless your own word
係祝福係喺呢度每一位嘅弟兄姊妹，
and bless each and every one of us who are here today,
使你嘅話語係帶着你嘅能力，
such that your word comes with power
係進到我哋嘅內心裏邊，
and enters our heart
去光照我哋，
to shine upon us,
去造就我哋，
to build us up,
去改變我哋嘅生命。
and to transform our lives.
我哋嘅禱告係奉耶穌基督的聖名祈求，
We pray this in Jesus' almighty name.
阿門。
Amen.
好，今天同弟兄姊妹去分享嘅題目係領袖的風範。
Today, the topic of today's sermon is the quality of a leader.
係啱啱我哋頭先所讀嘅撒母耳記上11章1到15節。
And it is based upon the passage we just read from 1 Samuel chapter 11, verses 1 to 15.
以前我聽過有人曾經咁樣講過，
I've once heard someone say this in the past.
喺艱難嘅環境裏邊，讓人係有機會係表現佢自己。
That during a time of crisis or difficulty, it allows someone to really show themselves.
究竟我哋點樣去睇危機呢？
How do we view crisis?
正如掃羅一樣，佢今天都係面對一啲危機。
And just as Saul, we just read in the passage, Saul himself was facing a crisis.
所謂危機就係有危險加上機會。
And when we say crisis, usually that includes both danger, but also has a built-in opportunity.
俗語講係有危就有機啊嘛。
Because in Chinese, the saying, you combine the words danger and opportunity, you get crisis.
越是艱難危險嘅時候，就越考驗我哋嘅個人嘅品格喎。
And the more dangerous the situation is, that itself brings a challenge, but also an opportunity for someone to develop their own personality.
同埋去睇到我哋平時所預備嘅係咪有真正嘅實力？
And it also shows whether the characteristics that we have prepared in the past really has any fruitfulness in our character.
喺危機裏邊揾到機會嚟。
And within a crisis, we can find an opportunity.
喺撒母耳記上10章佢講到，
In the previous chapter, in chapter 10 in 1 Samuel, it said this.
撒母耳係用公開抽籤嘅方式抽出掃羅為上帝所揀選嘅以色列第一位君王。
It described how Samuel chose Saul amongst the Israelites to be the first king of Israel.
雖然掃羅佢生得又健壯又俊美，
Even though Saul was handsome and was very good looking,
佢比以色列嘅眾人係高咗一個頭出嚟喎。
even to a point where he was actually one head taller than all the other Israelites around him.
從外表係無可挑剔嘅，
From an appearance, there's nothing to criticize of him.
但佢嘅內在其實係有弱點嘅。
But actually, in fact, there was a weakness inside himself.
佢係膽怯，所以佢匿埋喺個器具裏邊。
He had his own fear, which is why he was not willing to step out and rather stay hidden,
佢唔敢出嚟。
not willing to step out into the open.
咁樣咧，俾有啲以色列人咧，好似睇唔起佢。
And because of this, some Israelites don't really see highly of him.
佢哋覺得我哋要一個英勇善戰嘅王，帶領我哋去同列強去征戰。
Because some Israelites felt they needed someone who was both handsome but also fearsome to lead the Israelites to fight other kingdoms.
而呢個人俾選中嘅掃羅，居然係匿埋喺個戲劇裏邊。
Yet this person, Saul, who's been chosen, seemingly hides behind things.
佢真係能夠領導我哋嗎？
Can he really lead us to battle?
還係好似一個繡花枕頭咁樣？
Or is he only just a handsome boy and that's it?
好睇唔好打。
That you can look, he's good to look at, but not very good to fight with.
掃羅嘅軟弱嘅個性，讓到人哋去質疑佢嘅能力。
And this weakness inside Saul has led some people to question his ability.
因此有啲人係熱烈歡迎佢，但係有啲人咧帶住一個懷疑嘅態度。
That's why some people welcome Saul greatly, yet some others had some doubt.
甚至佢哋用不肖嘅眼光、藐視嘅眼光去睇掃羅。
Some to a point even where they look down upon Saul.
我哋剛才所讀呢段經文，撒母耳記上11章1到15節。
But from the passage we just read in 1 Samuel chapter 11, verse 1 to 15,
係講述掃羅點樣從危機中開始作為以色列人嘅領袖。
we read how Saul, through this crisis, started to become the leader of the Israel.
當中係顯示出佢作領袖嘅一啲風範。
And we start to see some of the characteristics he has as a leader.
而家我哋翻嚟，我再睇思想下呢段經文帶俾我哋嘅信息。
So let's now dwell deeply into the passage to understand what message this passage can give us.
掃羅王首次去領軍作戰。
And so the first time Saul led the Israelites into battle,
就係要同亞捫人去打仗。
and that was to fight against the Ammonites.
雖然佢嘅皇位仲未穩固，
Even though Saul's kingship has been fully been established,
但係神果然按住佢嘅應許，去使用佢，堅固佢。
but through God's grace and guidance, Saul was indeed secured and led by God,
使掃羅帶領以色列人戰勝亞捫人。
allowing Saul to lead the Israelites to defeat the Ammonites.
從呢段經文裏邊，我哋可以睇到掃羅佢作為以色列人嘅領袖，有4個風範嘅特質。
And through this passage, we can see how there are 4 specific characteristics of a leader that Saul exhibited.
第一，佢唔喺血氣中爭戰。
And the first is that he was not fighting in the flesh.
其實立王呢個政體制度對以色列人嚟講係一種新嘅開始。
In fact, when we say establishing a king, this is actually something which is new to the Israelites.
當然有唔同嘅聲音，
Of course, there were different opinions.
有啲人去贊成，有啲人去反對。
Some people agreed, some also disagreed.
喺度，掃羅用正確嘅態度去面對。
But here, Saul used a correct attitude to face this issue.
佢唔理會，特別係唔在意一啲反對嘅聲音。
In fact, what he did was he did not care about the opinions of others and did not listen too deeply or care too much about the disagreement and the voices that disagreed.
因為好多事係需要經過時間去證明嘅。
Because in reality, a lot of the things requires time to prove itself.
尤其係人心接納嘅程度，
In particular, it is the attitude and the hearts of people.
唔可以去勉強嘅。
And this is something where you cannot force.
喺以色列人中，一個新嘅領袖已經產生啦。
And the Israelites, a new leader has just been formed.
但係喺其他支派裏邊，仲有一啲雜聲。
But amongst the different tribes of Israel, there was still some criticism.
到底掃羅有冇能力帶領佢哋對抗外敵呢？
And that was whether Saul had the ability to lead the Israelites to fight against the enemy.
嗱，亞捫人就喺嗰時嚟攻打以色列地嘅基列亞比，啱啱就俾好掃羅一個機會，證明佢自己作領袖嘅機會。
And during this time was exactly when Ammonites came to Israel to attack the land of Gilead. And this created a great opportunity for Saul to prove himself as a leader.
嗱，喺撒母耳記上11章1到4節，佢講到亞捫人的王拿轄上來，對着基列亞比安營。亞比眾人對拿轄說：你與我們立約，我們就服侍你。亞捫人拿轄說：你們若由我刮出你們各人的右眼，以此凌辱以色列眾人，我就與你們立約。亞比的長老對他說：求你寬容我們7日，等我們打發人往以色列的全境去。若沒有人救我們，我們就出來歸順你。使者到了掃羅住的基比亞，將這話說給百姓聽，百姓就都放聲而哭。
Inside 1 Samuel chapter 11, verses 1 to 4, it says, Nahash the Ammonite went up and besieged Jabesh Gilead, and all the men of Jabesh said to him, make a treaty with us, and we will be subject to you. But Nahash the Ammonite replied, I will make a treaty with you only on the condition that I gouge out the right eye of every one of you, and so bring disgrace on all Israel. The elders of Jabesh said to him, give us 7 days, so that we can send messengers throughout Israel. If no one comes to rescue us, we will surrender to you. When the messengers came to Gibeah of Saul and reported these terms to the people, they all wept aloud.
嗱，呢件事起源係亞捫人侵佔以色列地嘅基列亞比。
This situation occurred when the Ammonites came and attacked the land of Gilead.
嗱，究竟亞捫人係咩人嚟㗎？
So who are these Ammonites?
嗱，喺舊約嘅創世記裏邊，佢講到亞捫人係始祖係羅德同埋佢嘅細嘅女兒亂倫所生嘅後代。
So through the in Genesis, we know in history is that the Ammonites actually came from the descendants of the incest that occurred between Lot and her daughter, and the descendants of that incest is the Ammonites.
而羅德就係亞伯拉罕嘅侄。
And we know that Lot is also the nephew of Abraham.
可以講亞捫人同以色列人都有啲親戚關係。
And hence you could say the Ammonites and the Israelites had some sort of family relationship.
嗱，亞捫人咧就住喺約旦河東一個亞嫩河同埋博雅河之間個平原。
So the Ammonites live on the plain between the Arnon and the Yabok River, which is to the east of the Jordan River.
佢嘅首都係拉巴。
And the capital city was Rabbath.
嗱，就係今日我哋地理上約旦首都安曼呢個地方。
And in today's term, this is a similar location to where the capital city of Jordan is in Amman.
嗱，但係亞捫人咧就成為以色列人嘅外敵喎。
However, the Ammonites became the enemy of the Israelites.
嗱，聖經記載上一次亞捫人去攻擊以色列人啊，係記載喺士師記11章。
The last time the Ammonites came and attacked the Israelites is recorded inside the book of Judges in chapter 11.
嗱，當時上帝興起耶弗他作為士師。
Last time, God called upon the judge Jephthah to come out.
將亞捫人大係擊殺。
And in that time, leading the Israelites to defeat the Ammonites very decisively.
嗱，而家亞捫人咧捲土重來，
And yet now the Ammonites have come back around
去對着基列亞比安營。
and have besieged Jabesh Gilead.
嗱，基列亞比咧就係位於約旦河東，大約係3個公里。
Now, Jabesh Gilead is to the east of the River Jordan, about 3 kilometers away.
係屬於迦得支派嘅分地。
And it belongs to the tribe of Gad.
記得啊，喺士師記20到21章去記載到。
And if we recall in Judges chapter 20 to 21,
當時以色列人同便雅憫支派人去打仗，
there we read that the Israelites were fighting against the tribe of the Benjamin.
就擊殺咗大部分嘅便雅憫人。
In that time, it killed a large portion of the tribe of the Benjamin.
其後咧，其他呢啲11支派咧就為到即係便雅憫人咧後悔。
But then the remaining 11 tribes were regretful about what happened to the Benjaminites.
所以呢啲以色列人為便雅憫嘅人嘅留翻喺度嘅男人咧，就揾老婆。
And what the other 11 tribes did was they tried to find wives for the remaining Benjaminite men.
佢哋將基列亞比人連婦女同埋成年人咧，連埋小孩子咧，全都擊殺啦。
Because of the fact that they killed the majority of the women and young child of Jabesh Gilead.
剩翻400個未嫁嘅處女咧，就俾便雅憫留翻嘅人咧為妻子。
And on the remaining, they only left 400 virgins that they left to be wives to the Benjaminites.
所以掃羅可以講係呢啲人嘅後代。
And you can kind of say that Saul is the descendant of these people.
佢係便雅憫人，
He is a Benjaminite.
佢同基列亞比人咧有皮深嘅親屬關係。
And so, as a result, Saul has a relationship and a close relationship with the people of Jabesh Gilead.
事實上面對亞捫人嘅攻擊，
And in truth, facing the attack from the Ammonites,
基列亞比人原本咧就打算係不戰而降嘅。
the people of Jabesh Gilead decided were on the verge of choosing not to fight at all.
佢哋想同亞捫人立約。
They were thinking or preferred to just have a treaty with the Ammonites.
佢哋乖乖出嚟咧就係投降，換取和平。
And for considering just surrendering to trade for just peace.
但係諗唔到亞捫呢個皇帝咁殘暴嘅喎。
But they never realized how cruel the king of the Ammonites was.
佢要求刮出嗰啲基列亞比人嘅右眼。
Where he demanded the right eye of the people of Jabesh Gilead be gouged out.
咁樣去凌辱以色列眾人。
And this was a disgrace as a means for disgracing the people of the Israelites.
咁樣先肯同佢哋立約。
Because only after gouging out the right eye was the king of the Ammonites willing to have a treaty with them.
呢種刮右眼嘅刑罰，
This gouging of the right eye,
除咗係侮辱嘅意思，
apart from being a disgrace,
其實都有啲軍事嘅含義嘅。
entails a bit of a military meaning.
因為喺當時士兵喺戰場打仗嗰時咧，佢嘅左手就拎起個盾，就護住全身嘅。
Because back in the ancient time during battle, the soldiers would use a shield with the left hand.
咁留翻個右眼咧去睇嘢。
Shielding the left side of his body, they would then use the right eye to look.
甚至佢哋射箭咧，通常就用隻右眼去瞄準嗰個對象嘅。
And even when, for example, for archers, they usually use the right eye to aim.
換句話講咧，你將人嘅右眼刮出嚟，
And in other words, what we're saying is that when you gouge out the right eye,
等於令到佢哋喪失呢個戰鬥力。
they essentially lose the ability to battle.
面對呢種羞辱，
And facing this kind of disgrace,
基列亞比嘅長老好有智慧，去請求亞捫人俾7天佢哋班救兵。
the elders of the Jabesh Gilead had a lot of wisdom, and in which they asked for 7 days of grace period.
好奇怪喎，亞捫王就答應咗喎。
During this time, trying to find additional reinforcements, and strangely enough, the king of the Ammonites agreed.
可能佢覺得以色列人裏邊冇人出嚟夠膽同佢即係營救呢班基列亞比人嘅。
The king of the Ammonites must have thought that no one would come and save these people.
所以佢咁大膽就答應咗。
And maybe in that kind of proudness, he accepted this kind of a temporary truce.
因為基列亞比人同便雅憫有呢個親戚嘅關係，
And because of the relationship between the people of Jabesh Gilead and the people of the Benjaminites,
所以佢哋就嚟到便雅憫地基比亞掃羅住嘅地方揾救兵。
this is maybe the reason why the people of Jabesh Gilead sent people to the tribe of the Benjaminites to ask for help.
便雅憫人聽見佢哋即係嗰種被人羞辱嘅話，
And when the Benjaminites heard about how they were being disgraced,
喺第4節講到百姓就都放聲而哭，
we read that in verse 4, how the people all wept aloud
因為佢哋束手無策啊嘛，
because they felt they had nothing they could do.
佢哋唔知點樣好。
They weren't sure what they can do.
嗱，當我哋睇到別人有困難，我哋咪淨係放聲而哭咧？
Today, when we see someone else struggling, do we simply cry with them?
會唔會你睇到別人嘅需要，睇到自己嘅責任咧？
Or when you look upon the other people's need, would you see it as your own responsibility?
如果將呢啲事當係別人嘅事，
If you treat these things as someone else's problem,
咁樣可能我哋淨係諗，唉，我哋量力而為啦。
we may feel that just we can only we'll try our best.
我哋一灑同情嘅眼淚。
We may weep a tear.
但係如果係當自己嘅事，
But if we consider their problems as our own problem,
就要去破釜沉舟，全力以赴。
we would then go all out and try to solve the problem.
喺撒母耳記上11章6節講到，掃羅聽見這話，就被神的靈大大感動，甚是發怒。
In verse 6, we read, when Saul heard their words, the Spirit of God came powerfully upon him, and he burned with anger.
掃羅聽見亞捫人對基列亞比人嘅嗰種侮辱，
When Saul heard how the Ammonites were disgracing the people of Jabesh Gilead,
甚至對所有以色列人嘅羞辱，
in fact, it's actually a disgrace to all of Israelites.
佢就大大嘅發怒。
He burned with anger.
但係我哋需要知道，
But we must remember,
佢嘅憤怒唔喺血氣裏邊嘅憤怒，
his anger does not burn from the flesh,
佢喺靈裏邊嘅憤怒。
but it is the anger from the Spirit.
嗱，喺雅各書1章19到20節佢講到，我親愛的弟兄們，這是你們所知道的，但你們各人要快快的聽，慢慢的說，慢慢的動怒，因為人的怒氣並不成就神的義。
Because if we read in James chapter 1, verse 19 to 20, it says, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires.
可以咁樣講，人喺血氣中嘅怒氣唔能夠成就神嘅義。
Another way you can say this is that the anger which comes from the flesh cannot produce the righteousness of God.
因為血氣對爭戰係毫無幫助，
Because the flesh does nothing to the battle.
反而係帶嚟更多嘅破壞，造成更多嘅紛爭。
In fact, when we bring the flesh to the battle, it causes more problems and more disagreements,
讓到仇敵可以攻擊，甚至毀壞教會。
creating an opening for the enemy, which could ultimately lead to even the church breaking apart.
但係因着聖靈嘅感動而所發嘅怒氣，
But through the anger that comes from the Spirit,
呢個係出自神嘅怒氣，
this originates from God,
係為要成就佢嘅旨意。
and it is there to fulfill God's will.
所以當我哋面臨屬靈嘅爭戰，
So when we face spiritual warfare,
千祈唔好用血氣中去行事，
we must not use the flesh.
讓聖靈去帶領我哋，
We must allow the Spirit to lead us
與神去同行，去爭戰。
and walk with God in the battle.
呢個係作為一個屬靈領袖其中一種風範，
And this is a characteristic of a spiritual leader.
讓聖靈帶領我哋。
Allow the Spirit to lead us.
第二點我睇到嘅，我哋要有呢個屬靈嘅責任。
And the second characteristic we see is that we need to have a responsibility as in the Spirit.
嗱，掃羅就認定咗，當亞捫人去入侵佢哋，同埋佢要去拯救以色列人，因為係佢哋嘅同胞，係一個責任。
So when Saul realized that the Ammonites were coming to invade their land, he felt the need to defend the Israelites because he knows that is part of his people.
同時，佢都係期待已久嘅機會。
Whilst in parallel, it is also the opportunity he'd been longing for.
嗱，喺撒母耳記上11章7到8節，佢講到，他將一對牛切成塊節，託付使者傳送以色列全境，說：凡不出來跟隨掃羅和撒母耳的，也必這樣切開他的牛。於是耶和華使百姓懼怕，他們就都出來，如同一人。掃羅在比色數點他們，以色列人有30萬，猶大人有3萬。
And we read in 1 Samuel chapter 11, verses 7 to 8, he took a pair of oxen, cut them into pieces, and sent the pieces by messengers throughout Israel, proclaiming, "This is what will be done to the oxen of anyone who does not follow Saul and Samuel." Then the terror of the Lord fell on the people, and they came up together as one. When Saul mustered them at Bezek, the men of Israel numbered 300,000, and those of Judah 30,000.
嗱，掃羅好用戲劇化嘅手段，
Saul seemingly used a very dramatized way of describing the situation,
殺咗一對牛，將佢哋嘅肉傳送俾各個支派。
where he killed a pair of oxen and shared it amongst the whole of Israel.
傳送呢啲牛肉嘅使者去宣告講：
In particular, the messengers passed on the message as well.
凡唔跟隨掃羅同撒母耳去回應基列亞比人嘅請求嘅，
Whoever does not follow Samuel and Saul on the response to protect the people of Jabesh Gilead,
佢哋嘅牛必遭同樣嘅待遇。
then their oxen will have the same consequence as well.
咁樣佢哋就決心引起以色列人熱烈嘅回應。
And that stirred up the hearts of the Israelites, and they all responded with a lot of response.
嗱，猶大支派挺身而出嘅有3萬人，
30,000 came from the tribe of Judah,
其他支派咧有30萬人。
and the other tribes totaled 300,000 people.
其實以色列人唔係冇作戰嘅能力，
In fact, we can see through this that the Israelites they did indeed have the ability for battle.
佢哋係缺乏團結呢個凝聚嘅精神。
But what they lacked was actually the unity.
佢哋係冇一個領袖，有一個堅強嘅意志去領導佢哋。
They lacked the leader who had a very clear vision to lead them.
呢個就佢哋想立王嘅原因。
And this is one of the reasons why they wanted a king.
至於作為教會嘅領袖，
Similarly, as a church leader,
需要有呢個屬靈嘅承擔責任，
they need to have the spiritual responsibility
堅決嘅去同弟兄姊妹一同去迎向將來嘅挑戰。
to have the determination to walk and lead the brothers and sisters to face the challenges ahead.
正如我哋今天教會面對可能好多嘅新移民，
In the same way today, how our church may be facing a lot of new immigrants,
我哋認定咗係上帝俾我哋嘅責任去侍奉佢哋。
we may have identified that it is our responsibility as a church to help these people.
我哋就係要承擔呢個責任。
we then must bear upon us this responsibility.
弟兄姊妹同心嘅，迎向挑戰。
Brothers and sisters, let's be united to face these challenges.
第三方面我哋嘅係弟兄姊妹，我哋需要係追求同心合一。
The third point, the third characteristic we see is that we need to look for unity in God.
喺撒母耳記上11章7節講到，於是耶和華使百姓懼怕，他們就都出來如同一人。
And verse 7 we read, Then the terror of the Lord fell on the people, and they came out together as one.
掃羅發出徵召之後，
After Saul sent out the message to call people together,
以色列嘅百姓就因着聖靈嘅催逼就出嚟，
the people of Israel, through the calling of the Spirit, came out together,
如同一人同心合一。
together as one, united.
其後掃羅運用策略，
Afterwards, Saul, through his strategy,
佢喺半夜三更過咗約旦河去做突襲，
did a surprise attack in the middle of the night, crossing the river Jordan,
佢突襲成功，大大擊敗咗亞捫人。
and successfully did a surprise attack, defeating the Ammonites.
於是以色列人喺對亞捫人嘅爭戰大大勝利，
And through this, the Israelites defeated the Ammonites very decisively.
贏得決定性嘅勝利。
And it was such a decisive victory indeed.
嗱，呢次嘅勝利證明咗掃羅具有個非凡領袖嘅能力。
And this victory showed how Saul and proved how Saul had indeed a characteristic of a leader.
佢確實係以色列人夢寐所求嘅王。
That in fact, he was indeed what the people of Israel wanted in their king.
以色列人完全係被說服啦。
And his critics were all silenced.
喺正式加冕典禮裏邊，就喺吉甲舉行。
And the actual the actual event of establishing him as king occurred in Gilgal.
當然仍然由撒母耳去主持。
And of course, this was still being organized and run by Samuel.
喺獻祭同普遍嘅歡樂裏邊，
And through these sacrifices and the joy and the celebrations,
掃羅正式被膏抹為以色列嘅第一位君王，
Saul was established as the first king of Israel.
一個全新嘅政體喺以色列展開咗。
And a brand new chapter in the political system of Israel has started.
喺度讓我係想起使徒保羅喺以弗所書，佢點樣同樣勸戒教會。
And here we draw a parallel to how Paul in the book of Ephesians encouraged the church.
教會要站立得穩。
That the church must stand firm.
嗱，喺以弗所書4章3節，佢講到用和平彼此聯絡，竭力保守聖靈所賜合而為一的心。
In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 3, it says, Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace.
嗱，呢個就係教會領袖重要嘅典範。
And this is the important, one of the cornerstones for a church leader.
彼此謙卑同心，
Be humble in heart
進入喺主裏邊合一嘅心。
and enter the unity within Christ.
嗱，呢度我就啱啱想起喺農曆新年前幾日嘅時間。
And when talking about this, I am reminded about the celebration of the Chinese New Year a couple of days ago.
嗱，教會有班弟兄姊妹，其實都幾闖出㗎，去組織去派一啲新年食物或者卡送俾教會其他嘅弟兄姊妹啦、新移民啦同埋朋友啦。
Where the church, where some brothers and sisters within the church organized very hastily some celebrationary packages that they sent out to other brothers and sisters or to new immigrants or friends of the church.
好多接受咗呢個新年嘅小禮物之後，佢哋覺得都好開心。
And many who received these small packages were indeed very joyful by this package.
同時係我哋有弟兄姊妹去參與、去派或者去預備啲新年嘅禮物嘅，我哋同樣都係好高興。
And similarly, those who helped and to both package the package, but also to deliver it, they were also very enjoyed the situation, enjoyed the opportunity as well greatly.
嗱喺呢個短大約係2個禮拜嘅時間
And within 2 weeks' time,
真係體現到我哋教會弟兄姊妹嘅同心合一嘅心。
we were able to experience the unity of our brothers and sisters of the church.
今日好多教會嘅紛爭，
Today, there are many disagreements and divisions within the church.
可能係教會領袖心目中嘅驕傲，
May come from the pride within certain church leaders' hearts,
自視過高，
seeing themselves too highly,
以為自己嘅想法係最好，
thinking that what their own thought is the best way,
唔會去接納弟兄姊妹嘅意見，
not accepting other brothers and sisters' opinion,
亦唔去禱告尋求上帝嘅旨意。
and maybe not even asking for God's will.
然而事實上，我哋係需要追求屬靈同心合一。
But in reality, we need to seek and long for the unity that comes from the Spirit.
以禱告作為扶持，去幫助完成上帝俾教會嘅使命。
Through prayer and help supporting the will of God has for the church.
嗱，啱喺上個週日咧，教會就舉行咗一個教會嘅策略發展工作坊。
Just on the last week, the church organized a strategy planning meeting.
目的係咩啊？讓教會領袖佢哋一齊有一個好好嘅溝通機會。
And the whole point of that planning meeting was such that the church leaders can come together and have a very good communication.
一起去同心合一嘅去商討教會未來嘅發展。
To come together and together in one heart, come together and discuss the future of the church.
讓我哋領受上帝俾到我哋嘅心意同旨意，
such that we can receive the will of God.
令到教會能夠喺布里斯托或者附近地區繼續榮耀神嘅名。
Such that the church can continue within Bristol and the surrounding region to glorify God's name.
最後一點，教會領袖係需要有饒恕嘅心。
And the last point to raise today is that the church leaders must have a heart willing to forgive.
嗱，掃羅係有一顆饒恕嘅心。
And in fact, we see Saul had this characteristic of a forgiving heart.
嗱，喺撒母耳記11章12到15節，佢講到百姓對撒母耳說：那說掃羅豈能管理我們的是誰呢？可以將他交出來，我們好殺死他。掃羅說：今日耶和華在以色列中施行拯救，所以不可殺人。撒母耳對百姓說：我們要往吉甲去，在那裏立國。眾百姓就到了吉甲那裏，在耶和華面前立掃羅為王，又在耶和華面前獻平安祭。掃羅和以色列眾人大大歡喜。
In verse 12 to 13, we read, The people then said to Samuel, Who was it that asked, Shall Saul reign over us? Turn these men over to us so that we may put them to death. But Saul said, No one will be put to death today, for this day the Lord has rescued Israel. Then Samuel said to the people, Come, let us go to Gilgal and there renew the kingship. So all the people went to Gilgal and made Saul king in the presence of the Lord. There they sacrificed fellowship offerings before the Lord, and Saul and all the Israelites held a great celebration.
嗱，喺呢度我睇到掃羅有個饒恕嘅心。
Here we see how Saul had the heart of forgiveness.
嗱，佢饒恕咗以前反對佢嘅人，嗰啲以色列人。
Here he forgave the people who originally questioned his kingship,
冇反過嚟去尋仇。
and he did not turn around and seek revengeance.
嗱，喺呢度我都諗起美國前總統Jimmy Carter 卡特總統同佢嘅妻子 Rosalynn Carter 一段故事。
Here I recall of a story between previous U.S. President Jimmy Carter and his wife, Eleanor Rosaline Carter.
喺佢哋35年一起生活，出現咗好多時間觀念嘅問題。
During their 35 years together, there was many incidents with regards to time.
原來卡特總統佢出於係一個海軍嘅背景，同埋佢時常按照佢爸爸嘅生活習慣去做嘢。
So the background to this story is that President Carter, he came from the Navy, and also he used to live his life reflective of how his father lived.
嗱，佢約人嗰時咧，佢總係會提前少少出現。
And this was, and one of the characteristics of this is that whenever President Carter would meet someone or meet someone at a certain time, he would always arrive 10 minutes early.
如果佢等到個約會時間超過10分鐘咧，佢就會離開。
If after 10 minutes after the original time of the meeting, he would then leave.
嗱，卡特總統對佢嘅太太羅莎琳咧，都係咁樣嘅喎。
And President Carter did this, treated his wife Rosalind in the same way.
嗱，當佢太太遲到嗰時咧，卡特總統咧經常俾佢妻子好難睇嘅面色。
And so whenever Rosalind was late to any meetings or appointments, President Carter would show not the prettiest face to his wife.
後來有一日嘅朝頭早，
But eventually one day,
卡特發覺咧，佢唔記咗買生日禮物送俾佢太太喎。
President Carter remembered, or shall I say, forgot to buy a present for his wife.
佢亦想到佢同佢太太婚姻衝突個問題。
But through this, he remembered or recalled about the difficulties and arguments he had in his relationship with his wife.
包括乜嘢啊？佢成日唔記得佢太太嘅生日，同埋去慶祝佢哋結婚嘅週年。
And these problems included how he kept forgetting his wife's birthday and maybe even their anniversary.
卡特就寫一封好短嘅信俾佢太太。
And so President Carter instead wrote a letter for his wife.
佢話：羅莎琳，我答應你。
And in the letter he wrote, Eleanor, I promise you,
從今以後喺我哋婚姻嘅日子裏邊，
from this day forth in our marriage,
我永遠唔會對你嘅遲到嘅習慣
I will never, for any lateness you have every time you're late to our meeting,
再講一句難聽嘅説話。
I will never say anything that's not pleasant to the ear.
卡特太太後來佢自己回憶，
The wife, Eleanor Rosalind Carter, later on recalls,
佢話：呢個就係總統先生俾佢最好嘅生日禮物。
this was the best present that President Carter gave her.
呢個就係一個好好嘅饒恕嘅例子。
And this is a very good example of forgiveness.
有句俗語講到，
There's a saying,
喺報仇嘅時，一個人跟佢敵人係同等嘅，佢唔去不追究佢，先係更加優等。
when someone seeks revenge, they are at the same level as the person he is revenging. But only if, on the contrary, if they don't do anything, only then are they at a higher level.
掃羅帶領以色列人去打敗亞捫人之後，
After Saul defeated the Ammonites,
掃羅竟然喺撒母耳面前對嗰啲以前反對嘅人、批評嘅人講好説話。
Saul, in front of Samuel, was willing to defend those who criticized him before.
依次掃羅去對人嘅寬恕，
And Saul's forgiveness
同佢喺第10章佢唔追究嗰啲為難佢嘅人係有啲唔同嘅。
Saul's forgiveness in this incident is quite different to what was described in chapter 10.
掃羅不單止係寬恕嗰啲損害佢名聲嘅人，佢同埋佢拒絕自誇嘅行為。
Saul not only forgave the people who were criticizing him of his name, but also did not boast about his actions.
佢唔單止係講神，而唔會講到佢自己係拯救以色列人。
He would not put himself above God, and neither did he boast about how he saved Israel.
佢堅持嗰日係耶和華拯救嘅日子。
He maintained and he reinforced the point that it is God who saved Israel.
唔係去處罰或者去死亡。
And it is not a date for punishment or death.
當掃羅帶領以色列人戰勝咗亞捫人之後，
When Saul led the Israelites to defeat the Ammonites,
佢冇處罰以前睇唔起佢嘅人。
he did not punish those who looked down upon him.
佢用一個饒恕嘅心去對待佢哋。
He treated them with a forgiveness heart.
佢亦唔會將功勞歸功於自己。
He also would not boast about the achievements that he has.
佢深深知道呢個係神拯救以色列人嘅事。
Because he knows that it is God who saved Israel.
作為教會嘅領袖，
As the leader of the church,
你有冇一個饒恕嘅心呢？
do you have a heart of forgiveness?
你會唔會事事都係歸榮耀俾神呢？
Will you always bring glory back to God?
喺呢度我做一個總結。
And here, in conclusion,
仇敵或者外敵對以色列人嘅攻擊，
the attack by the enemies upon Israel
都係一波未平一波又起。
is seemingly a continuous wave where before the first one subsided, the second wave would hit.
當以色列人係面對非利士人嘅壓迫，
when Israel were facing the persecution of the Philistines,
亞捫人咧，佢係趁亂咧去攻擊以色列人。
the Ammonites would take the opportunity to attack the Israel.
今日教會嘅領袖都係要面對一啲屬靈嘅爭戰。
Today, our church leaders also need to face different spiritual battles,
成日都係有咁嘅情況。
and this occurs regularly.
魔鬼都係總係無所不用其技。
The devil always uses different strategies
佢要攻擊我哋，
to try to attack us,
叫到我哋疲於奔命，
to cause us to fear,
甚至叫到我哋跌倒失敗，去遠離神。
causing us maybe even to fall and maybe walk away from God.
我哋係真正需要用呢個信心，更堅定嘅係依靠神。
And so we need to use a strong faith and really rely on God.
因為神唔會丟棄我哋嘅。
Because remember, God would never abandon us.
而教會嘅領袖
And the church leaders,
作為神嘅僕人，
as the servants of God,
要關心神嘅事，比關心自己嘅事要更多。
need to care more about God's things over their own things.
教會領袖只要依靠神，
As long as the church leader relies on God,
因為神嘅力量 同佢嘅帶領係至關重要嘅。
Because God's power and leadership is key.
千祈唔好睇自己嘅成就，或者睇人哋嘅批評。
We should never look upon our own achievements or look heavily upon the criticism of others.
或者將自己嘅意見抓住唔放。
Or hold too tightly upon our own opinions.
記住，我哋係要按神嘅心意去行事，講真話。
Remember, we need to speak the truth according to God's will.
更重要嘅係為到大眾嘅好處，同嘅神嘅榮耀去作出決定。
And more importantly is that the leader needs to recall the need of the people and as well as the need of the will of God to decide what to do.
唔係為到自己嘅光榮去做嘢，
And it is not for their own glory.
係為到上帝嘅國、上帝嘅義去榮耀神。
It is, in fact, for God's will to glorify Him.
嗱，呢啲都係作為教會領袖嘅風範。
And these are the characteristics of a church.
讓我哋係低頭同心禱告。
So let's bow our heads in prayer.
親愛嘅阿爸天父，
Dear Abba Father,
當我哋遇到困難險阻嘅時，
when we face difficulties or challenges,
求你都係以你嘅愛去提醒我哋、扶持我哋，
may you, through your love, support us and remind us,
使到我哋更加去依求喺你嘅恩典裏邊，
such that we can rely upon your grace
經歷你嘅大能大力，
and experience your power and your might.
我哋將一切嘅榮耀係歸給俾你。
We hand all glory into your hands.
主啊，求你親自引導我哋同教會面臨所有嘅未來嘅挑戰。
Lord, may you lead this church ahead into all the challenges and difficulties we may face.
有聖靈去引導、去扶持我哋，
That the Spirit will lead us and guide us,
好叫我哋能夠係成就你嘅心意。
such that we can fulfill the will that you have for our church.
神啊，幫助我哋，光照我哋，
Lord, help us and shine upon us
改變我哋，重新去塑造我哋嘅生命。
and change us transform our lives.
我哋多謝你願意繼續去引導我哋嘅前面嘅路。
We thank you, Lord, for continuing to guide us on this path.
求主叫我哋能夠係找住你俾我哋嘅應許，找住你嘅恩典，
May you allow us to continue to hold on to your grace,
繼續喺 Bristol 去侍奉你。
such that we can continue to serve you in Bristol.
我哋感謝你聽我哋嘅禱告。
We thank you for hearing our prayer,
禱告係奉耶穌基督聖名祈求。
and we pray in Jesus' almighty name.
阿門。
Amen.